I'd like to turn to the issue of just why Bach may have written this piece, even beyond the theological issue of writing a piece that was Catholic or Lutheran, or just wanting to make a universal mass. But let's just talk about Bach as a composer nearing the end of his life. It's 1748, 49. Is there some element here that he wants to preserve some of his favorite pieces from his past? Bach wrote so much music that was really what we might call occasional music, pieces that would be performed for cantatas once a year, or maybe someone's birthday, that would never be done again. The music, the parts might be used to wrap fish or bratwurst or something. But those are very good pieces. So does he want to, is there an element of returning to some of those pieces and trying to put them into a new context here? Maybe George, you want to speak to that element?
Certainly Bach must have been aware that the German texted pieces, in particular, could have been ephemeral. That is, they could have had a limited shelf life because the poetry in which they were based was going out of style. And also, looking back over his works, he had all these extraordinary pieces, and the secular works would often be performed on just one occasion, or the church works just once a year. And so by putting together a mass, he was able to rewrite these pieces. So it gave him the opportunity not only to reuse them, but also to refine them in the process. And once again, I think that the Mass offered him an opportunity that, say, a Passion would not, because it was common in the Mass repertory to recycle pieces. It was a green genre, you might say, in the Baroque time. And so it did give him this opportunity, and as Peter mentioned, he reached all the way back to Weimar, taking the Wein and Klagen course for the Crucifixus, and then went back through his works, surveying, taking the very best pieces that fit into the Mass. But I think it goes even beyond that, because he would not only take the best pieces, but he would take the best section of the best pieces. So the Wein and Klagen course from Cantata 12 is an ABA form, and he takes just the A and decides to refine it and turn it into the Crucifixus. So in a sense, you get not only the creme de la creme, but you're getting the creme de la creme de la creme. Right? Because he's taking the very best of the very best and putting this work together.
Yeah, I would basically agree with most of that, and respectfully disagree about maybe one little part, that some of the cantatas from which the movements in the Mass in B minor are arranged, the B sections are utterly spectacular too. I'm thinking of like in Cantata 120, and so I remember when I was younger and I first heard Cantata 120 for the first time, and the A section sounded really familiar, because it was the Mass in B minor. I thought, okay, it's wrapping up now. And then, of course, there's this whole extra section. It's fantastic. There's a lot of, there are various reasons why you might use only one section of the piece, but I think some of the unused sections are way up there in quality too, of course. But one thing I would say, that's a very complex issue about what Bach thought he was up to by writing an entire piece like this towards the end of his life. I think many of us, none of us has fallen into this yet, but it's a very common thing to just sort of uncritically assume that Bach may have been concerned about his reputation and posterity. It's possible, we just don't know the answer to a question like that. I very much doubt it myself. My suspicion is that he would have thought such a thing sinful. In fact, to be overly concerned about your reputation beyond your life. But yet at the same time, there's something sort of supratemporal about his writing this piece in the first place. I do think he really thinks of it as his best and as a summary of his whole life, and as virtually every kind of vocal music is drawn on you. You've got stile antico, you've got stile moderno, you've got galant music, you've got Lutheran, you've got chorale melodies built into the opening of the Kyrie and so on. Practically everything is in there. It really is a massive sort of compendium of musical styles and his own music from his own life. There's a printing of the letter that Bach sent to Dresden in 1733 for the application for the title as chord composer, and he makes this, it's almost embarrassing to read now about how he grovelingly sort of says, I'm sorry that my expertise in music is so weak, and I hope that you won't take it wrongly and so on, but this is what I've got, and so on and so forth. It's the word Wissenschaft that really sort of caught my eye there, you know, so that's the word he uses for my expertise in music is so weak, and it made me think back to this magnificent cantata, 28, in which the alto sings, Die Wissenschaften, was ein Mensch dichtet, wird endlich durch das Grab vernichtet. Expertise and what a human being comes up with will in the end be destroyed by the grave. And then it goes on, and then ferociously a bass comes in with 3 oboes accompanying, sings, an irdische Schätze das Herze zu hängen ist eine Verführung der törichten Welt. To hang one's heart on earthly things is a seduction of the foolish world. Now, that's a bit of an extreme way of putting it, and we don't know to what extent Bach personally believed the things that he set to music in his cantata text. But I find very striking how ferociously he sets all of that, and it makes me wonder whether he really is at all concerned about his posthumous reputation. It's just bringing extreme excellence to the end of his life is something worthwhile in and of itself, even if nothing else than that comes out of it, I would guess. But we have no real evidence. It's hard to know. So this is one of those beautiful situations where however strongly you feel about any particular thing, there's not really much that can contradict your viewpoints, so it sort of ends up working for you.
Well, thinking about posterity is probably a very human thing that was there all the time. It is true for Bach we don't have documents, but if you just take CPE Bach, the second son, as someone you can compare to to J.S. Bach, then one also sees that when he felt that his old age was coming, he wrote to his publisher, well, I'm now working on this large oratorio in order that people may not forget me too quickly. I could well imagine that this line of thought, which is documented in the 18th century, also for other composers, was on Bach's mind as well. Mm-hmm. The only thing is I don't question what you said, George. On the other hand, I would opt to keep more possibilities open. I'm not that much convinced that Bach was really aware that, for example, cantata poetry of his time in someday would be old-fashioned. I think people of his generation were so proud that they had achieved something new with the modern cantata poetry, something new that got rid of the what they thought old-fashioned 17th century poetry. And of course Bach kept performing his cantatas until the end of his life. So probably he thought, well, the cantatas are one thing, but they are, well, for special reasons, they can be performed perhaps only in the 2 main churches in Leipzig, and probably not suited for other towns. And maybe Bach was thinking to revise the music and have it sound in a different context and with a different text, which always brings out different facets of the meaning of the music. So maybe Bach wasn't thinking strategically about his future or the future of his works. One other aspect I think is important is that Bach, from the 1730s at the very latest onwards, developed a habit of recycling his music for other occasions. The Christmas oratorio is perhaps the first really important work to consider here. The other later piece, the 4 so-called Lutheran masses.
St. Mark Passion.
St. Mark Passion and many other ways. So we can see Bach from the 1730s onwards, being concerned about the masterworks he had already delivered. And I would draw a connection to what C.P.E. Bach said in the preface to the edition of the chorales, that everybody expected only masterpieces from his father. So apparently there was a demand, if a new piece by Bach comes out, it must be a masterpiece. And Bach was under pressure, and we know that well, of course, he had all this mastery and contrapuntal elaboration and so on, but what apparently was a difficulty for him was inventing new melodies. This is described in one document that he always had to improvise for half an hour before he could compose something, and apparently finding original thematic material and finding ideas that are worth elaborating was more problematic for him. So maybe he simply said, well, I composed all these masterworks in the 1720s, and now I can't go on with this indefinitely. I need to recycle the music in some way. So this may also be a consideration that was on Bach's mind.
I just want to respond to Peter on 2 points. One, I think also, no, positively on one. Positively in the sense, with the sense of posterity, but also this, his writing out of clean copies of the St. Matthew Passion and the St. John Passion. I mean, that's a very arduous task. He had them in performance parts, but he decides in the 30s and 40s to write out clean scores. Mm-hmm. And you would think that that's got something to do with posterity. I mean, with preserving these extraordinary pieces at the expense of writing out a score. And the St. Matthew Passion in particular, with the black and the red ink, is really an extraordinary thing to look at, but must have taken a lot of time to lay out. The other one is, yes, I could stand corrected on the German text, but I'm sure he was aware that the Latin was more universal than the German. I mean, universal within Germany and then universal outside of Germany. So the Mass offered him the opportunity that way, even if he wasn't worried about the German texts.